Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. This is John Crosby. I'm Vice President of Communications for the Software and Information Industry Association, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar on improving service quality through web performance monitoring. We are hosting this webinar today in partnership with Keynote Systems, which is the leading provider of on-demand test and measurement products for mobile communications and the Internet. And we'd like to thank the folks at Keynote for sponsoring and hosting this event with us today. A couple of programming notes that I want to make sure you're aware of. During the course of the presentations, if you'd like to ask any questions, just take advantage of the chat box that's available on your screen at any time. Later on, during question and answer period, you can actually participate in voice questions by dialing 14 on your dial pad to ask those questions. You should know the operator later on will follow up by providing those instructions, but we just wanted to let you know ahead of time. A couple of promotional notes from SIIA, just to make you aware. Next month we are hosting our On-Demand Europe conference, which is the ISV conference for cloud computing. That'll take place October 18th through 20th in London. Featured speakers include John Suffolk, who is the Chief Information Officer for the United Kingdom government, and also Peter Lorenz, who is the EVP for Small and Mid-Sized Enterprises at SAP. We hope you certainly check out information on that event and make plans to join us. There's a URL on your screen now for you to take a look at the event, but you can find it at SIIA.net/ODE. Also, just one more note, in November we'll be hosting our All About Mobile conference, which is the ISV conference for mobile business. That's going to take place November 16th and 17th in San Jose, California. We're pleased to have Keynote also on board with us as a co-host for this event. You'll note on the screen we have two fabulous keynote speakers, Matt Thompson from Microsoft and Wayne Ward from Sprint Nextel. For any information on that event, you can actually go to SIIA.net/AAM. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the moderator for today's webinar, Mr. Dave Karow, Senior Product Manager with Keynote. Dave?
Thanks so much. We're looking forward to having an interesting conversation today. If you can see here from my bio, my role here at Keynote is managing our flagship transaction perspective and application perspective web monitoring products. I also manage the desktop scripting and analysis tool called Kite, the Keynote Internet Testing Environment. And as part of that, I run the online community, and build tutorials and videos and such. And so I think I've sort of been selected because I'm a curious person and know a thing or two about the business. But the main reason we're here is to kind of tap the three folks we've got on the call, on the panel. Before we jump into that, just a quick note on a free white paper that's available. This is just out. Enterprise Management Associates has written a white paper, Why Web Performance Monitoring is More Than a Competitive Advantage for SaaS Providers. And it's got a lot of very interesting information, and we provided it for free. And the way you get this is just put in your browser bit.ly/SaaSreport, and up it'll come. So on that note, let's jump right in and learn a little bit about the three folks on our panel today. First of all, from InsideView, we have Jason Muldoon. He's Vice President of Product Development at InsideView. As the Vice President of Technology, Jason is the driving force behind InsideView's product design and development, ensuring superior user experience, performance, and reliability for our rapidly growing customer base. So prior to InsideView, as you can see on the slide, Jason developed insights and expertise in cutting-edge web application development as a user experience consultant for various high-tech companies in the Bay Area. And before that, as a consultant, he worked on the user experience team working across India and the U.S. at Digital Think, an e-learning company. So Jason has definitely had his experience with user experience and those applications. And then from DocuVantage, we have Dave Wiggins, who's the CTO there. Dave has over 21 years of experience in the electronic document and workflow management industry, including executive leadership, business analysis, and process automation. He provides leadership and guidance with the proven ability to dramatically reduce costs, increase client revenues, and productivity through the use of electronic document management systems, EDMS. His project management principles are client and requirements focused, and capturing accurate requirements, modeling the business process, and seeking ways to improve through the use of tools and technology are the cornerstones of what they do at DocuVantage with their project model. And then we have Vic Chaudhary. Vic is Vice President of Product Management and Corporate Development at Keynote Systems. And as Vice President here, he is responsible for leading Keynote's product strategy, sales enablement, and executing on the company's acquisitions and partnerships. He spent 20 years in CEO, marketing, and engineering positions at blue chip and startup companies. And at Keynote here, he has previously served as Vice President of Marketing and Corporate Development, and extending the company to new markets via no less than 15 acquisitions. Before joining Keynote, Vic was the CEO of on-demand analytics company BizMetric, who ran product management at database pioneer Gupta Technologies and led the core software engineering teams at Oracle. So that is quite a lot to start with, and I will go ahead and I'm going to just park us on the Q&A slide while we get into the panel so you can kind of see who we're talking about. And I want to begin the conversation by just asking each of our panelists to tell us a little bit more about your roles and what your company does. For the people on the call, what is the perspective you're bringing to this topic of service management, and frankly, what does your SaaS service do? So on that note, I want to go ahead and start with Dave Wiggins from DocuVantage.
Hi, thanks, Dave. This is Dave. As the Chief Technology Officer, I'm involved in kind of the architecture of the solution, which includes not only the back end and monitoring, but also the user experience. I bring with that, customer implementation expertise, where before becoming the Chief Technology Officer, I was the head of the implementation team. And what we do is provide document management and workflow management solutions to help customers streamline and automate their operations so that they can operate more efficiently.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and jump over to Jason then, VP of Technology at InsideView.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. This is Jason Muldoon. I'm the VP of Technology and Product Development here at InsideView, which I'll talk about in a minute. My background is originally in sort of HCI, human-computer interaction and human factors, and really started my career as a user experience guy and a UI guy. At InsideView, I sort of manage everything in the product side, from helping with definition to design, through development, testing, and eventually sort of hosting and monitoring and maintenance of our application. So sort of soup to nuts, everything back there. InsideView is a company that I sort of helped started about 5 years ago with our CEO, Umberto Moletti. And really the value proposition we wanted to bring to the market was software for salespeople to help them do their job. I mean, that was sort of our initial thought, as opposed to software for sales managers, like a CRM. And that value proposition, basically manifests as an application which helps sales and marketing professionals be more productive by delivering business and social intelligence into the appropriate context. And by that I mean a CRM or an SFA or something to that effect. And really, today we're in this era of information overload. There's all this great insights and information about companies and people on Google and on Twitter and on Reuters, and it's sort of information overload. And what InsideView, the service, does is we collect all that data, and we scour the web, and we license some of the paid data, and we divine key insights into what's going on with those companies and what's going on with those people. So if you could imagine 5 or 10 years ago, the sales cycle, for a typical salesperson, maybe selling security software, would be work a list, hope to find somebody who has some sort of compelling business need that aligns with your business. Imagine a world where you know that there's a company in your territory that recently had some sort of security issue. Imagine that there's a director of IT on Twitter complaining about the sales process for finding a new security software application. And imagine if you had the email and phone number, and you could start a social dialogue explaining your solution directly to that person. And that's InsideView in a nutshell. Today, we're here to talk about web performance. Really, this company from the ground up has been built around user-centered design principles, Web 2.0, user-driven innovation. And web performance is really the key tenet to user experience.
Great. All right, let's move over to Vic then.
Thanks, Dave. This is Vic Chaudhary, and pleased to be here today. I'm with Keynote Systems, and what Keynote does is we're a cloud monitoring company. We monitor the user experience of your end users on your online and mobile initiatives. So we have about 2,800 customers, i.e. companies that use our services. We have a SaaS platform. All of the data is collected from about 3,000 measurement devices, either PCs or mobile devices, which collect as much as 400 million measurements every single day. All the data gets sent back to our hosted service. Our portal is called My Keynote, and then we have 100,000 users, over 100,000 users that use it from all geographies in the world. So my role at Keynote is, for the purpose of this presentation, is primarily about managing the user experience of our My Keynote portal and all the associated products. And we really pay attention, my team pays attention to the quality of products, the usability of it, the functionality of it, as well as performance. And organizational imperatives are really what help us drive toward the better user experience, but we always keep the end user in mind.
Great. You know, Vic, I want to loop back around to something kind of left out of the introduction. I kind of wanted to reset the stage on the focus for today's call. You know, the overall theme of the webinar series we're working on here is focused on web performance monitoring. This first webinar in the series hopes to provide some educational and informative guidance and practical advantage to SaaS providers on improving the service quality, you know, by effectively monitoring the performance of their SaaS application. And I guess one of the issues, you know, how are we defining SaaS companies? You know, basically, if you deliver your products or services through the internet, if the performance of your web applications is critical to the success of your business, you know, if not delivering on your SLAs means lost revenue or irreparable damage to your brand, if any of these describes you, then you know you'll definitely find the things this panel has to chat about today really interesting. So I think we've got the right folks assembled, and I'm sure we'll get into some best practices today, and we'll hear some great success stories. But one of the things I really want to start with is by challenging each of our panelists to think about what are some of the organizational challenges on delivering service quality. Sometimes you talk about rolling a boulder up a hill. What is the boulder in the hill when it comes to delivering on service quality? I think I'm going to actually start with Jason on this one. Jason, I kind of want to, you obviously have a user experience background, but you now have the responsibility, you said, soup to nuts for the whole experience. What would you say are some of the organizational challenges on delivering service quality?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, anytime you're sort of making room in the organization to make things happen, it's all about cost and cost justification. And really, I think the biggest challenge is articulating the value proposition and the importance of performance and user experience, for that matter, to everybody in the organization. I think that it means something very different to a salesperson than a marketing person. I believe the key to always making headway and defining value propositions and sort of pushing things forward is measurement. And I think, by measuring and explaining to the organization what exactly you're trying to do and the impact of what not doing it well will be, which is lost business, which is maybe a low net promoter score. That's really how you can help push those boulders and help get buy-in from everybody across the organization.
Okay, so getting it sounds like being able to put things in the perspective that audience is going to understand and bringing it back to the business in a way that's compelling for them. It's great, thank you. So, Vic, do you have some thoughts here?
Well, I think the organizational challenges in delivering service quality are huge, and the fundamental reason is that people think differently. You might have the engineers or the operations guys or the business owners, and everybody has a different view on what service quality really means. So the primary challenge that we face is organizationally understanding who in that organization has a complete end-to-end view of the customer experience. Are they thinking? Who's thinking about what the user is experiencing? And here's a little shout out to some of our friends at a CDN called Strange Loop Networks, and they blogged recently about your power users are way different from your end users. When your typical end user goes to your site or your application and your page isn't loading or it's blank until it's fully loaded, they don't hit the reload button. They just wait there and wait until it completely loads. So who has that view? And it usually starts with somebody who is passionate about the customer experience. Maybe it's somebody in support, or it could be somebody on the online business side. It could be in engineering. But somebody has to carry the torch, and that's the biggest challenge.
So it's kind of like the elephant with the blind men and the elephant. They each have a different perspective, and you got to figure out who really has a more holistic. Who's the person that isn't blind, seeing the whole elephant? That's pretty tricky. Dave, you want to weigh in with anything on this?
I agree with both of those guys, and the challenge has always been making sure that everyone understands that the customer is the priority and that performance for that customer is the priority. And you have to learn to speak all the different languages of the developers, the marketers, the salespeople, the operations people. And that's your biggest challenge, is making sure that everybody is on the same page.
Right. Let's shift gears, though, and go from sort of organizational challenges to what are the technical challenges, particularly with a complex SaaS offering. Very few of us are pumping something out of one data center right to one user. So what are the technical challenges that arise in understanding visibility on service quality and performance management? Jason, I'm going to go back to you for the first time on this one again.
Sure. I think the biggest technical challenge is that there's lots of moving parts. I think you just sort of hit on it right off the bat there. When you look at performance and you look at the performance of a page you're delivering, you're starting basically somewhere in the back of your infrastructure with the database. You're moving through your switches and your network internally. You're moving out of your infrastructure across, the net, and eventually into, your customer's infrastructure, and eventually being resolved in a browser. And there can be issues everywhere along that entire path. And so the real technical challenge is understanding, all those points in your path, and understanding, where you can optimize and where you can really drive a more efficient, performance.
Got it. I noticed Vic's over here tugging on my sleeve, so I'll let him chime in here as well.
I have the advantage of being in the same room here with Dave here. But Jason, one of the challenges that we face being a SaaS portal is technically think about it. We've got a variety of different browsers. People using Internet Explorer, or Firefox, or Chrome. Different mobile devices. Sometimes they want to be able to click on an alert in their email and then go to a portal and see what the performance of their site is. Does it work on these browsers? Does it work on these different devices? What's the performance there? Then you've got geography issues. You've got folks, our customers are coming in from Europe and the US and Asia Pacific. Their experience is going to be vastly different. You've got networks and the way, whether you're connecting on Sprint or UUNet or some ISP in your particular region. What kind of web services are you using on your platform? Do you have a third-party graphing application that calls out across the internet to display it? And then finally, how's your application code written? Is your JavaScript all nicely at the bottom, or is your CSS style sheets at the top? And if not, these cause huge technical challenges in really delivering good service quality.
Yeah, so I think the common thread with both of you is the short answer is it's complicated.
Right.
I think I want to save some time maybe for Q&A to get back to that if necessary, and maybe give Dave a chance then. But I want to jump on to the next question, because I think that people on the call are pretty interested in knowing this whole issue of service level agreements. We all know users are using the application to get a business result, and if they're kept sitting waiting, before they get the results, they're probably going to feel dissatisfied or go somewhere else. And so there's a lot of talk about service level agreements, and that seems kind of like an insurance policy. If I had this great service level agreement, then as long as my vendor can honor that, then everything's going to be fine. So I want to kind of go around the whole table here and ask, are SLAs standard business process for you? So Dave, I left you out the last question. I'll let you start this one here.
Great. Yeah, SLAs are actually a critical part of the success of SaaS vendors, and for us, it's absolutely part of the sales process. Being able to point out that we have a service level agreement and what we do to maintain that service level agreement gives people the level of confidence that they need to sign up with a SaaS service. we're managing critical documents and information, in our product. So they need to feel comfortable that that system will be up 24/7.
Got it. Yeah. Vic?
In our industry, everybody does SLAs. The question is how are those SLAs set? And sometimes you have to have the nuance that you may not be able to deliver on your SLA because of things that are outside your control. There might be a major outage happening at a certain ISP that is causing problems. So I think when you set SLAs as a SaaS vendor, you have to be able to inject those nuances in there. What we would recommend, for example, is in our sales agreement, we try to do SLAs, but also make sure that our service is competitive with other SaaS services that our customers is using. So there's a general comparison against other services. You want to make sure that you deliver an SLA that is at the top 3% of that, the top 97% of that comparison, and that's what we aim for.
Got it. Jason?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that last point. I mean, it's all about your competitors. It's all about who you're being compared with, and you want to make sure that you're doing your housekeeping and that you're able to stay ahead of your competitors. And hopefully, if you're setting an SLA that your competitors are struggling with, hopefully you can beat that SLA without much of a problem.
I'll take the opposite. I'll take a little bit of a divergent view as well. SLAs are critical when your customers sort of pull out that piece of paper and say, hey, here's the SLA and you're performing to it or you're not. But I think the human element is really important. Despite all SLAs, if you hear from your customers that they're not happy with the performance of your portal, and gosh, that's happened to us as well, we pay attention to that human emotion and say, well, how do we take that human emotion and turn that into data so that we can demonstrate that maybe we're pretty close to the SLA, but there's one group of users sitting in Topeka, Kansas that is having a problem, and the reason is the following. It's really important to be able to go from the SLA into the root cause of that problem.
Got it. Well, that's a pretty good segue, and really I had two halves of this question I wanted to ask. And the second half is, how are you building performance monitoring into those SLAs to make sure there's a standard that both sides are signed up to? So, how do you put that differently, how do you actually instrument so you're ahead of the curve in knowing how your SLA is playing out, so that you can be watching your own performance and know whether you're at risk of violating your SLAs? And I think this is a kind of a provocative topic because I was talking to somebody the other day, and a major player in the SaaS space has a site where they publicly confirm the availability of their various internal systems, and the name of that site is Trust. But it reminded me of something that's very interesting. Was you back into the arms race days, the phrase was always trust but verify. And I think that unless you have some way of actually getting the data which says, well, how are we doing, besides just are there all green lights on your dashboard inside the data center, it gets the question. So the question is here, how are you building monitoring into or related to these SLAs so that there's some sort of standard that you can both agree to? I think I want to. I'll go with Dave for the first on this, and then we'll go to Jason and Vic.
Sure. Part of the monitoring is literally having the data center provider monitor all the way to the edge of the network, and then putting in our application monitoring out to the client and reporting back that information. So tracking things like API calls, result times on queries, and feeding all that information back in the system so that we know that there's a performance issue before the client sees it. That's one of the key.
So Dave, you're actually instrumenting your app to keep performance data as part of its normal function?
Yes.
Right. That's good. So Jason?
Yeah. I think the key for us is really a culture of measurement. So it's very similar to Salesforce.com with their trust.salesforce. It shows you the way the apps are all performing per second. So we have 3 tiers of measurement. One is our how are requests being served up from our servers. And we aggressively watch that, and we have a team of people whose primary responsibility it is just to watch that every minute, every hour, every day, and make sure that we're exactly where we need to be. And then ultimately you have the edge-to-edge network, how long it takes to deliver your requests across the internet, across the geographies. And then eventually you have the client-side load time on the whole other side of the request. And back there, again, we can measure with sort of JavaScript tools and things to actually test what, rather than listen and wait for customers to tell us what their performance is, we can tell from our reports exactly what the average response time is across, aggregate through the application plus every single request that's in the application. And part of that culture of measurement and optimization is, this is not a project that we handle, 1 month at a time. It's every day, it's every week, driving these numbers where they need to be.
Got it. So it sounds like it's pretty central to how you organize what you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Vic?
So Dave, for us, SLAs are monitored by our operations team, because if our SLA to our customers, if you don't meet the SLAs, our operations teams are the guys who have to kick in. But the way the ops guys would manage SLAs may be quite different from, say, how the product guys might do it. The ops team would be monitoring availability and response time using, for us, of course, we eat our own dog food or drink our own champagne, so we use Keynote synthetic monitoring, and we monitor the availability of every single page that's displayed to the end user, response times. We monitor entire transactions. We monitor it on web browsers. We monitor it on specific mobile devices like iPhones. That's what we do. We do synthetic monitoring. But the ops team also does use a software to do infrastructure monitoring, so they might monitor the health of various servers and tie it back to the Keynote measurements that are being taken from the outside. The product guys really think about user experience. And it really starts with thinking about how is the user going to use my portal. They're going to come to my.keynote.com, log in, and then go off to the Graphs tab, and then go and generate a graph. And that's the transaction that our team would monitor on an ongoing basis to ensure that we're meeting our own SLAs and objectives for quality.
Got it. All right. Well, there's sometimes a lot of uncertainty about what the bottlenecks are that people should be thinking about, that that people should be paying attention to, monitoring and looking after. So Jason, you spoke a little bit about sort of your kind of the various layers, and that there's people watching the servers all the time, making sure that they're being really crisp. But how would you say well, what are the bottlenecks that you typically see, and then how does that evolve over time? Do you find a bottleneck and then flush it out and it doesn't really bother you again, or typically you got the same issues that come up and you just have to stay on top of them?
Yeah, great question. So we do rapid development, so we're releasing once a month. So we're constantly changing the entire landscape of our application, which makes it a very interesting ongoing task. If I were to talk about the bottlenecks, I think that the server-side stuff, the database stuff, it's very easy stuff to wrap your head around. It's very easy stuff to measure and control and make better, and there's no excuse not to do that really well, and not to have best-in-class server-side response time. I think the biggest bottleneck that people are usually the most blind to is basic client-side delivery of those assets, of those pages, which is to say that your customer's network as well as your customer's browser usually has the most processing to do, right? It has to pull down HTML, big heavy files, and really using best practices to understand how you can streamline that. And then on the backside also, sometimes helping your customers, with their internal networks and make sure that they're able to get the best performance for your application. But really the UI layer is a very heavy piece of an application usually, or the UI asset. And there's lots of best practices in how to optimize those, and also how to connect that distance between those customer network and our network as quickly as possible. Right?
Okay, that's interesting, particularly how you're basically kind of ripping up and rebuilding so much stuff so often that I was kind of thinking of sort of a game of whack-a-mole where you could probably do a great job fixing something and you'll make an architectural move and you've got a whole new thing to keep an eye on. that's the nature of moving quickly and innovating, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Dave, do you want to talk a bit about this a little bit? You know, what are the bottlenecks that people should be monitoring and looking after? And I mean, there's kind of the obvious ones, but I'm wondering, are there any blind spots we can find here? Are there any typical blind spots that people on the call need to kind of take away as a heads up?
Yeah, I think Jason hit the nail on the head. The real spots where you need to focus on are the client side, whether it's running searches and returning result sets, or in applications like ours where you're transferring files for clients to open and view. You really have to focus on running those operations as efficiently and as lean as possible, because you don't know what their network is once you get outside of your infrastructure. So you really have to monitor those response times at that level. We do that by running various monitoring sites outside of our infrastructure that are kind of simulating the user experience so that we can see those response times and what they are realistically versus what they look like when you're on the other end of a gigabit pipe.
Yeah, it always looks pretty good on the other end of gigabit pipe, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Reminds me of a time when there's some testing that was a little too close geographically, and you just don't really get good data. If you're down the street checking how things are responding, it's going to look good. Vic, why don't you share some thoughts here?
So this is a great question, and it's really interesting to see from Jason and Dave how the focus is on the front end of user experience, because in the past it used to be a lot about the network, and the network is still important. I mean, a major social network had a massive outage last week, and the site was down, not available for hours, right? So, and that was a networking issue. It had to do with the cache and DNS availability, and those are absolutely typical issues today. And when I look at the data in Keynote, when we're monitoring all of our customer side, it really falls into these categories. I would say 3 categories. One is the network. There are DNS issues. There's caching issues. Those are typical. There's application code issues, like what Jason and Dave talked about, all in the front end. And the typical issues we see there are just simple things like placement of JavaScript files. JavaScript files should be at the bottom of your page. CSS files should be at the top, really, for best performance. And if you don't follow these best practices, then bad things happen. Like, if your CSS files are way at the bottom, then certain browsers, like Internet Explorer, will just not render anything on the page. It'll just show you a blank page until the whole CSS file is downloaded. On the other hand, if your JavaScript files are at the top of your page, then the browsers sort of go from a 4 or 6 lane highway and become a 1 lane highway, and all downloads are no longer parallelized, so it makes it really slow. So these are UI issues. But one of the biggest trends that we are seeing is that performance is affected by the code you're putting on your site, which is calling some sort of a web service that is not running in your data center, or you're not in control of. Google Analytics tracking code, Omniture tracking code, some printing service that you're calling across the internet. You have no control over the performance of these web services, and those are causing more problems, especially as our applications are all essentially living in the cloud.
Yeah, it's the composite app thing. It's not all coming from your data center. Great, that's helpful. So, what then should people really be tracking? Are there metrics that you guys recommend people look out for so they can keep track of these performance issues? If there's a scoreboard or a dashboard, what are the 4, 5, 6 things that should be on that dashboard? I think some of this is specific to your application. Obviously, Dave at DocuVantage is he's delivering large documents for people to view, and there's a average time to open doc, or I don't know what you've got, but what are the kind of high-level metrics? What's the handful of things that you should be tracking and everyone should know about? And I'll actually go to Dave first here.
Yeah, the 2 key things that we look at as far as that are, the first one you already mentioned, which was the file download times. We need to know how long it took from the moment a client requested a file until it actually was delivered to their computer. The other side of that is actually tracking the response times of all of our API calls. In an application like ours, it's built on web services APIs, so we need to know how those APIs are performing because customers can also write to those APIs. So those are our two key areas.
And when you say you're measuring those APIs, what are you coming back with? We're talking about an average time to respond, time between request and first byte, time to do the whole thing. How do you go a little deeper, and what are the actual metrics you watch to keep track of those web services calls?
Yeah, our API call is end to end. So from the minute they invoke the call until the minute that call is completed, those are what we're looking for.
Got it. And then do you somehow break those down by classes of calls or types of calls? I mean, some are going to be longer calls than others by their nature. How do you make sense of that? It's a lot of data, right?
Right. That all gets loaded into database reports so that we can look at the various classes of API calls and what their response times are.
So it wouldn't make sense to have, our average is X across every call we ever have. If some of the calls are like...
Yeah, for something like our application, that type of average doesn't hold any value.
Got it. Okay. Jason, thoughts here on if you had a dashboard and you had 4, 5, 6 things that were up on the front of the room and they could go green, yellow, or red. What are those things?
Yeah, I think the first thing we always measure, which I just sort of take for granted, is basic server response time. So our ability to generate a response, to the internet. And there we track, aggressively across, basically the most popular, most visited, URLs in our application. And we're always looking at, the top 95% of traffic. We want to make sure we're delivering sub-second, hopefully under a third of a second for every single one of those. So for our application, which is sort of a much more even asset load, which is a little different than if you're trying to deliver big documents that can vary in size a lot, we basically just have a hard minimum, which is everything we produce needs to be under a third of a second. And we have to figure out creative ways to optimize all those workflows that, maybe without any optimization take 10 seconds. And it takes some smart guys and hopefully some CS degrees to sort of figure out how to drive those things down. And then the backside of that is the actual user experience of all those web flows, summarized by customer as well. So looking at it all specifically by popularity, sort of anonymous to your customers, versus how all of your customers are actually experiencing your application. That's sort of an early warning sign of, maybe somebody has a slow network, maybe somebody has a data center out of Germany, and you need to start thinking about how to deliver more quickly to a German user.
So that's really interesting. So you're saying you actually have the ability to drill in and look at for client X, what's their experience look like?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty compelling. That sort of instrumenting that level where I imagine if you were a sales or a support rep and you're getting a call, it'd be nice to kind of go to that screen and sort of see what you see, because if you know that you're delivering third of a second at the data center and this person's average response time is 12 seconds, you might start by offering to send them a router that costs more than $29 for their office.
Yeah. You joked. That actually happened to us.
Yeah. Well, tell us about it. What you can.
Yeah. So we actually had a customer that, this was 2 years ago, but, everything that was going on, this is before we actually measured end user experience about 3 or 4 years ago. And everything in our server was telling us that the responses were going great to this is actually another San Francisco company. So one day, finally, me and my assistant administrator just went to their office and sat down with their network guy and looked at their network, and they were using this, $20 home router for an office of 50 people. And we, helped them pick a better router, and, the next week they had great web performance.
Right. Yeah, interesting. That story does pop up again and again. People just assume it's just plumbing, and, it doesn't matter. What else? 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 What else I want to make sure we get through a few more questions and then open up to QA. When we're looking at performance, are we looking at response time availability of the infrastructure or the application, and where do you measure from? And I think we've talked a little bit about this already, which is, it sounds like I would dare say that the people on the call today are a little more forward-looking and that they're talking about end-to-end. I mean, Jason, you did mention you're certainly watching the server and saying, well, wow, we're doing great, we're under a third of a second, but you're also caring about that sort of end-to-end experience, and so is Dave, and I know that Keynote certainly watches that stuff. But it's interesting. I wonder if we take a step back and look at people we know or things we've heard. Is there a bias towards paying attention to the stuff you can control and not worrying about the stuff you can't control? Or have we actually come to the point where people are getting away from that? It seems like it's human nature to monitor the things you can control. What do you think, Vic?
I think that's here's why that question is really important. Is because today we're talking about SaaS applications, software as a service. So if you're talking about software as a service applications, I would take a slightly contrarian view to Jason, where he said, let's start with looking at a server metrics, because if you're a SaaS application, you don't want to start with the server. You want to actually start with looking at your application. That's much more important. Look at the top transactions that your users make on your applications. What pages do they go to? Where do they log in? And track that first and foremost. Spend more time doing that than tracking your servers, because frankly, all the server monitoring in the world has existed for the past 25 years, and at the end of it, you still have sites that go down, that are not reliable. And as SaaS vendors, I think it's our responsibility to ensure that the end user experience is top of our minds. Start there, then go to your servers, if you have time even.
Well, okay.
Slightly contrarian view.
Yeah, well, and I wonder, Jason, to give you a chance to kind of defend yourself there. And I'm not sure when you say the server responding in a third of a second, that's granular bits to make a transaction come together, or that's literally the person asked for something and it heads back out the door in less than a third of a second?
That's right. So what I was talking about is actually the application's performance on the server. So we look at specific transactions behind the firewall first, and then we actually look at those transactions through the internet and how they're delivered on the opposite side of the divide. But if I could add to that, I think one of the key things, to sort of speak back to the question, is there a bias for us to focus on what we can fix and what we can measure easily? And I think there definitely is. And I think that one of the things you have to think about your business is focusing on your core competencies, right? I think that there are things that we can measure very easily and we can optimize, and that's where we should really spend our energy and look to outside help to help us bridge those gaps that are sort of outside of our core competencies. Measuring how things are going across the Great Divide, figuring out how to optimize the code path from or the network path from San Francisco to Frankfurt. That's hopefully we're always making good decisions and trade-offs about what we should be building ourselves and what we should be buying and sort of pulling in help for.
Last week, guys, there's a company called Bluehost that hosts over 2 million websites, and they had a catastrophic outage. The interesting thing about that situation was that if you went to their control panel and looked at your website, and it said, well, all the servers are running fine. And I think it's precisely because many companies take that approach of saying, well, let's monitor what we know best, we can control best, and they do that, but they forget about, well, did you measure from San Francisco or from London if somebody could even get to that site and there was a DNS issue or not, or if your servers weren't responsive in certain areas? And that company had over 50% of its sites down for over 7 hours. Huge business loss. You searched on Twitter for Bluehost, and you got furious users all over. Just every second there'd be 65 new tweets on that topic. Think about the users first. Worry about the infrastructure next.
Interesting. Well, I noticed just internally that we have some ops guys that are really good at instrumenting very low-level things like a database queue or thing, and they watch that stuff diligently. But it's interesting you point out that that you kind of have to have both views. It seems like it's just like you've got to have, and that's why I asked for the 4 or 5 or 6. Most of you guys have kind of homed in on 1 or 2 things you really care about, because I think that there's probably kind of a need for multiple perspectives on what's going on. And obviously, if you're missing the blind spot's the big problem, right? The one that's the blind spot is the one that is gonna bite you.
Sure.
So how do we, and actually a couple of you have actually already talked about a little bit of this, but my next question was, how do you build instrumentation into your infrastructure as a provider? So, you're a SaaS provider. You're all about delivering software as a service over the net. How do you build in the notion of monitoring and instrumentation to actually measure the stuff that matters? And we've heard a little bit already from each. I'm kind of, I think I'd like to I'll just open up to the first who wants to jump in, actually. Dave or Jason or Vic, who wants to jump in here?
Yeah, this is Dave. I think the core piece of it is actually you need to have that performance monitoring as part of your code. It's kind of the lowest level that you can get to that can track the user experience from end to end. So you have to be thinking of that information from the ground up. So you want to make sure that you've got that as part of your code, and then you bring in the third-party tools to monitor outside of that. If you're in a cloud infrastructure, those providers will typically provide the infrastructure monitoring that'll get you to the edge of the network. But your own code is part of tracking the total user experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a huge challenge, though. Think about what developers have to do for every release. They're really focused on functionality. Just getting it out of the door and on time is such a huge challenge. So instrumenting your application code to do performance monitoring usually is the last thing on people's minds. And so the challenge that we face, and even we're a web performance company, a mobile performance company, and we do this stuff really well. Recently, we had a release of our portal, my Keynote, and we added a new tab called Dashboards. Well, we were so keen to get the product out, and customers, were really asking for it. We got it out, but even our own team didn't think about, well, maybe we should add a performance monitor for the Dashboards tab because it's a new thing. So, as a result, in the first day, we, suddenly started realizing that there's a performance issue because we're getting customer complaints to a support line. So we very, very quickly had to go in there and try to create a new script to go and monitor the dashboards page, and then we made the changes necessary to improve the performance of that site. That stuff happens all the time, and no one's immune from it.
Right.
No, and that ties exactly back to the first question, organizational challenge, getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah, because
it closes the loop there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a fortunate day when people are, and I'm in the sort of front end world, the optimization world. That 3 years ago there was a lot of missionary work just to get people to understand, let alone care about how to make a page optimized. And I think that there's been progress there. But I guess it's sort of it's an ever-going thing. Different teams are going to have different orientations, and Jason, it sounds like your team has had sort of snappy performance kind of in there from the start, or certainly maybe a couple of years into it, it was front and center. Maybe that part of that is your background as a UI guy, as opposed to being a database optimizer by nature. But was there like a evolution for you? And maybe it's not at InsideView, maybe it's up to before InsideView in terms of making the case to actually build that stuff in.
Yeah, I think the key. So one of the question you asked was about sort of how to instrumentation, and I think you have to really instrument into your people, not into your code. And you need to have MBOs attached to this, and you need to make sure that every important person in the engineering team has some sort of compensation tied to performance and uptime and all those really key metrics. And it's Digital Think, my last company, was obviously very important for us as one of the earlier SaaS providers, and then going into InsideView just sort of baked from the ground up and baked into, like I said, the comp plans, the people. Our engineers know that if for the company to be successful, we have to have really good performance and uptime, and for the company to be successful, they need to be successful, and that's where we tie all those compensation loops together.
That's interesting. It's a great thinking out of the box. I mean, we're all talking about where do you put the instrumentation, and at the beginning you're saying basically you put it in the humans because then they're going to do the right thing.
That's right.
Thanks for that. So here's a for those who are sort of like at the edge of this and kind of thinking about, well, maybe I should be doing more of this, but boy, it's gonna cost me either in time or priorities. Is monitoring a value added service? Is it an extra cost, or is it something you can use to grow your business? Is it a tax, or is it a secret sauce?
I'll jump in
part
there
of the secret sauce.
Got it. Is that Dave?
That was Dave.
Yeah.
Really is part of your secret sauce. I mean, customers expect high performance applications these days. It's no longer something that you can just throw on the side. It's expected as a minimum. So it has to be part of how you can differentiate yourself, because it has to be there. You can't leave it out.
Got it. And so so you would say it's something you use to grow your business, is the investment in that. Vic, I know you were going to say something here.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is a topic that's been debated for a long time. In the SaaS world as well as in the operations world. What's the business value of site performance? And you're really asking, can you use it to grow your business or grow your revenues? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So there's some great data. Actually, if the folks on the call want to Google business value of site performance, I think on the first page you'll see a blog from one of the performance gurus at Keynote, a guy named Ian Withrow, and he's collected some statistics that's publicly available from Bing and Shopzilla and Mozilla as well as Strangeloop. And the bottom line is that a 2-second change in performance has an impact of anywhere between 4% to 25% of revenue or conversions. So for Bing, they did a study internally that said if the site slowed down by 2 seconds, it actually had a 4.3% drop in revenues for them. Whereas for a company called Strangeloop that has a lot of small customers, they're CDN for small customers, a drop in 2-second degradation caused anywhere from 13 to 25% in conversion rates. Those are real numbers.
Right.
So if you improve your performance, you're going to increase you're going to increase your revenues. You're going to grow your business. And conversely, if you don't, you're going to lose money.
Well, I'm kind of reminded about the saying, which you can't manage what you don't measure. And so I guess there's plenty of compelling evidence that it matters, but if you don't have the means to be monitoring it and knowing what it is, and that kind of ties the whole conversation in a loop, really, which is improving service quality through web performance monitoring. It's if you don't know how your service is varying, and whether that be internal instrumentation, whether that be end user monitoring, whatever it is, then you don't know whether you're working these metrics in your favor or you're letting them eat you alive, right? Like, gee, business seems to be slow. I wonder if it's the recession. No, actually, we're just a slow website. People don't like us anymore. So I think that's perfect point to kind of, we've only got a few more minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we had time for a little bit of Q&A. If anybody wants to chat a Q&A question, they can type that. I think I'll actually go ahead and let Anthony, our operator, jump in and open up the lines in case anybody wants to queue up to ask a voice question. Let's go for it. Anthony?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to register a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone. You'll hear a 3-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you'd like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3. Once again, to register a question, please press 1-4 on your telephone. You may also use the chat feature located in the left-hand corner of your screen if you'd like to register online.
Okay, great. Well, while we're waiting for anyone to queue up on the voice if they want to, I've got a couple questions that have come in already here by chat. This one's an interesting one. How different are SaaS and cloud when it comes to web performance monitoring? How does the situation differ? And I'll leave the question out there for a minute and maybe I'll clarify a little bit. But I think I want to just I'll actually go to you, Vic, for the first shot at this. How different are SaaS and cloud for web performance monitoring?
Well, cloud is bigger than SaaS. So, cloud includes software as a service. It includes, that's applications like our companies here on this call. It also includes platforms like Microsoft Azure or Salesforce.com or hosted VMware. So cloud is a bigger term. But when it comes to monitoring performance, when you monitor the performance of the cloud, you need to monitor the performance of a cloud-based application, i.e. a SaaS application. But you also sometimes need to monitor inside the cloud from your data center. Sometimes you need to monitor from a VMware instance that's being spawned. So it's a bigger problem.
Got it. So I got it. Dave or Jason, you want to weigh in on that?
No, I think Vic nailed it on the head. Cloud is so much bigger than just SaaS that you really have got to look at both sides of it. You've got to look at the inside as well as the outside.
Great. Hey, let me check in with Anthony real quick. Anthony, do you have any voice questions on the line?
There appear to be no questions over the phones.
Great. Okay. We did get one more a question on the chat, but I'm noticing we're running short on time, and I do want to respect people's time. They may have a meeting to go to after this. So I think, John, if you could jump back on and wrap us up here. I want to thank everyone for their time as moderator, and I'll let John kind of wrap things up for SIIA.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, and thanks to everyone for participating. I want to thank all of our panelists as well, because you guys not only provided a great service to everyone participating, but extremely helpful to the broader technology community through SIIA, and that's what we aim to do for executives who are in these key positions. I want to make sure that I give a particular shout out to Keynote, because you guys were not only instrumental in hosting this event, but in providing your thought leadership and expertise in the programming. So thank you very much. And to all of our participants, thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks a lot.